So welcome everyone to the seventh episode of Creators Arena, brought to you by Creators of Product. Today we are lucky to have with us Delan Mendonca. He's right now a product manager at Microsoft. Previously, he has done some interesting stints in product. He was heading the product at Instamojo, worked with Paytm and Facebook before that. Uh, Delan has been writing a lot as well. If you have not seen his blogs and his website, you must go and see. Uh, he generally writes quite interesting things on his blog and on his website. And he also believes that a day without laughter is a day wasted, which I 100% agree with. In today's session, he is going to be touching on a very interesting topic, how to deal with and how to tackle imposter syndrome. This is a common thing that you hear from a lot of creators in India and various other people. So without wasting any more time, let's welcome Delan. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much for taking out time to do this with us.
Thanks, Devakar, for the intro. Very kind words. Thanks everyone for attending this. I'd like to start off by sort of acknowledging that most of the time when we're doing talks, webinars, and the sessions, the discussions we have, be it blog posts or webinars or whatever, it's all about the positives. It's about, okay, how did I growth hack this? How did I earn that role? How to break into this? How to be the number one at that, etc. But life is full of definitely of setbacks, failures, and everything that is not a success in the middle. And I think acknowledging those, being able to manage those well, and getting past them is the strength in itself. And so here's my little contribution today, talking about imposter syndrome. The agenda for the talk is pretty simple. I felt like a loser. I don't feel like a loser anymore. What happened? So that's agenda in very short. And yeah, that's what we're going to be covering today. I'll share some stories and some pointers for you how you can also beat this phenomenon if you experience it. So yeah, welcome aboard, past, present, and future imposters. We're going to learn how to beat imposter syndrome. Okay, what's up? First, what is it? Okay, so I think as sort of the name itself implies, imposter syndrome is this feeling where you feel you're unfit to be in the place where you are. You have this perception that there's something lacking in you that everyone else has. Because of this, now it doesn't stop at that feeling. Because of feeling, you sort of develop fear and self-doubt. Now, self-doubt is that you start doubting your abilities. For me, when I experienced it, I felt like, okay, I've been a PM or something for so many years. I've gone to a new place and I'm not able to succeed as before. I'm doubting whether my previous experience was even valid. Did I actually do a good job? Was I even actually a good PM? And there's other fear. When you're in a new place, because you're an imposter, you feel that you don't belong here, and you feel that you're going to get called out. There's just one meeting away, one email away, one discussion away from people finding out that you are stupid. That hey, this guy doesn't know. This guy's an idiot. And that mixture of fear and self-doubt paralyzes you. You feel stuck, and you're not able to put your best foot forward. You're not able to go ahead, and you get paralyzed in your work. It's a very overwhelming feeling. Now, first up, I want to call out that there's sort of two types to this, I would say, in my opinion. There's once when there's actually a gap. Now, I don't say gap in a bad thing. It's that it could be that, okay, you are adjusted to a different setup and you come to a new place, and there's like a cultural gap, structures are different. Either there's a knowledge gap or there's a skill gap, which you can cover. So there's an actual gap you have to cover, and that's why you're feeling different. The second is a sort of perception gap where, if I give an example, so you might go to a fancy, well-funded startup, and everyone there is from all those big name colleges, and you are not from one of those colleges, and you feel like, hey, did I come here by mistake? But no, that's something where you feel that you don't belong, but your skills are there. And so one is the actual skill gap, and one is the perceived gap. So my tips are more oriented towards the former, because that's sort of what I experienced. But I think we'll be able to cover both. One other thing is that this feeling of being an imposter, it's found to be fairly common. So one very famous story around this is that they asked the students at new admits at Stanford Business School every year, how many of you feel that you are the mistake that the admissions committee made? And you're the one they let in accidentally, you're false positive in data science terms. And 2/3 of the class raises their hands up. Can you imagine that? Like 2/3 of the folks who are 2/3, it just cannot be that 2/3 of the class has come in there by mistake. But that shows that how widespread a feeling of not belonging, or feeling, at least when you're transitioning to a new place, a feeling of not belonging is. So that's sort of what the situation is around imposter syndrome. Now, short, before we go into the tips, a little bit of a short story about how I experienced it. What happened to me and why, why am I giving this talk? So when did it happen to me? So it happened to me when it happens to a lot of people around a period of transition. My career transition was for around 6 or so years. I had worked largely, I would say, in one type of company. It's this small VC funded startup. It's a young company. The folks are young, products are new, and is it open office hipsters, open office culture, hipster stuff. And that's the kind of company I was working in. When I transitioned to Microsoft last year at roughly the same period in June last year, I went through like a 180-degree shift in what I was experiencing. Now, how was it different? So even actually one of the things also is that all the prior work I had done earlier was in the web space. It was like, desktop applications and a little bit of mobile. Last year I joined through campus placement. It wasn't completely in my control, but I ended up on the network monitoring team inside Azure. Now, Azure, as you might know, is the cloud offering from Microsoft. So by definition, it's something that's way more technical. And I ended up on the network monitoring team. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's monitoring TCP IP packets, their flows, latencies across EAS networks. Okay, if you're confused about this, you're exactly in the same place where I was last year, not knowing what to do. So when I came to know which team I was joining, I did the usual stuff what everyone does. I went and stalked my coworkers who are there. I went and read blog posts. Okay, what is this team doing? How are they thinking? And I was completely confused. My boss was a master's in networking. His boss was a PhD in networking. The blog post they had written went completely above my head. I didn't understand a single word. As a fake engineer and MBA, when I think of networking, it means shaking hands with people. Packet flows, loss, latencies, these are not something I knew a single word about. And I definitely started getting a sense that, okay, this is not going to be that easy transition that I imagined. I personally was coming in because I had done what I perceived was fairly well earlier. I felt, okay, I'm going to come in that cliched 30-day, 60-day, 90-day plan. Yeah, I was ready with that. I was like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to kill it. By day 60, I'm going to meet talk to my technical manager, notice this, launch one small feature in the 60th day, take it forward. That was not what happened. So first thing I realized was that I had a knowledge gap. Once I actually joined there, I realized, okay, in terms of operating structure, the new place was very different from anything I'd imagined earlier. So I jokingly say, how the quantum physicists say the universe has 26 dimensions, because I did not know that there are so many ways in which a company can be different from my previous experience. Everything that I thought about was different. So the slides are because my previous experience was working in small startups and small companies where it's like a village. I know everyone by name. I can catch someone and just solve issues, and it's a small hamlet. Moving to a new company felt like not only moving to a city, it felt like moving to a city in a new country where I don't know the language. The people drive on the wrong side of the road, and I'm just feeling like a stranger. Like I just don't feel comfortable here. It's completely new, bizarre world. So that sort of, I hope I've been able to convey, what this sort of feeling is, that I sort of had these habits and biases earlier. They were not translating into a new place, and I sort of felt like stuck. So that's where I hope I've been able to convey sort of what it feels like personally. Next up, okay, so now let's go into advice. So like, okay, now I've conveyed to you what it feels like. Like, okay, imposter who I. Now what do I do next? How do I approach this problem? So to start with, the fabled advice that we tell ourselves is like, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. But is this really true? Is this like, so one qualifier I'd like to add here is the understanding of how much pressure you're in. So there is your comfort zone where you're not growing, you're completely okay, and you're stagnating, or the world is moving forward. There's your stretch zone where you're comfortable. This is called, frequently referred to as a state of flow, where it's a certain amount of stress, but the goal is achievable. So it's actually a thrilling push. You can achieve it. Beyond that sort of lies the death zone. So where, this can be either you feel that it's too difficult, or it's a toxic workplace, or the coworkers are really bad, or the culture is something you're not at all, worth changing. You don't find it's worth it. So that brings me to sort of my first step. Like, your decision zero when you're dealing with imposter syndrome is quit play. Do you want to quit or do you want to play? You should decide whether this game is worth playing. Now, it's either it's a yes or no decision. But if you can't make up your mind easily, it's okay to wait. Some people want, if some people can do this intuitively, that after a while you get this feeling that, hey, I can be here and it's fine. So some people you might just want to wait. You know, give it time and see how things play around, and then make these decisions. It's okay to wait also while you make this yes decision, but you want to first decide whether this trade-off is worth doing it. So for me personally, I did my calculus and I was like, okay, you know what? Net it works out for me. I think I can do it. I think I can get over this hump of knowledge gap. It's a new thing. I think I can adjust. So I had to commit to it. I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to play this game. So that's the most important. This decision number 0 before you even start tackling the problem. Okay, so that was 0. Let's go to number 1 now. Okay, so number 1 is, before you go around and try to slay your fears, that you're in this scared place, isolate a part of your life where you feel comfortable. Set aside a find comforting space. What does this mean? So seek solace. So you would want to share your feelings with your, be it friends, co-workers, family, etc. And especially, I think that a lot of these folks might not be able to understand your problem, but that's actually a good thing. They're not going to intellectualize and give you solutions. What they're going to do is like, hey, I'm there for you. Let me know when you want me to make your favorite food. Let me know when you want to go and go to the bar or whatever. But this is going to offer you non-judgmental comfort. And that's sort of, to start out, that's sort of what you need. You don't need solutions right away. You need to have like a safe, comforting space and people you can talk with. Second is another comforting space, I think that might be useful, is sort of get productive outlets. Now, emphasis on the word productive. Outlets are, be it meditation is great, running is good. I think anything that allows you to go out of your body and it's physical and, it's physical, that takes you out of your mind, that, is not something that you can get rid of your anxieties, is great. That's something you want to look at, whether you can get some sort of physical outlets or hobbies. People also take recourse to typically Netflix, alcohol, God knows what, but that's like you might end up with 2 problems later. So definitely, yeah. So that's something you want to be wary of, not ending up with starting with 1 and ending up with 2. But you want to start off with sort of finding a comforting space before you go and attack the problem head on. So that's like tip number 1. So now tip number 2 is peer baseline your struggles. What do I mean by that? So when scientists publish research, they send it for what is called peer review. They send it to other scientists and say, hey, here's my research, here's how I did it. Can you replicate it? Is this real? Is this actually meaningful? Does this experiment that I performed in my lab, can you try doing it and see if the results hold up? So that's what you want to do. Before you want to get a sense of what, from all these things that you're feeling that, I'm an imposter, I don't fit in, etc. Is it just me? Or, what's the scene with, so you want to reach out to peers within your team, within your org, within your company, and see what they went through, or people who might have treaded that path earlier, and say, discuss, okay, what is up? Did you also feel something similar? Did you go through this? Why this is important? So one story here is how we tend to automatically sort of blame ourselves, or we take the blame for bad situations. So one story here is how I saw this in documentary where Johnny Ive, former design head at Apple, he says when they tested new interfaces on people, when people would struggle with an interface, they would think they are stupid. And I think, they wouldn't think that the interface is designed poorly. I think that's sort of an analogy what happens in your workplace too, where when you encounter something challenging, you're automatically sort of putting the blame on yourself versus finding out, okay, how much is this interface bad? Is this company bad? Is this org, etc., whatever it is, what is the actual reality out there? So you want to go and sort of separate your perceived problems versus what everyone is going in. And there's also this joy that you get when you find out, oh, your engineering team is also treating you like this shit, or your situation is also bad. Misery loves company, and make sure you go and get that company. So that's tip number 2. Third is, you've decided, okay, this is my situation. You've got a fair read of it. You want to prepare yourself mentally about getting into the grind. So there's 3 parts to this. Acknowledge the slog. So you're going to be in this fairly new world, like, where you're adjusting to the situation, and it's going to be a struggle. It's not going to be a replay of what you've done earlier. You have to learn a lot of new things. So acknowledging the slog means you have to reset your expectations. When it came down to me, I came in with very high expectations. I was like, okay, I've been a PM earlier in this new role. I'm going to kill it. First 6 months, 1 good project out the door. Within 1 year, I'm going to angle for promotion. 1.5 years, I should be done. And yeah, senior PM, boom, done. That sort of it. And within 3 months, after 90 days, after I'd done my 90, I was like, okay, I'm glad they didn't fire me. Like, that sort of kind of self-perception that I had. And I was like, okay, when I sat back and thought about it, I was like, okay, you know what? I can leave those expectations aside. I've reset them. These are the things I want to do, and I'm willing to wait as long as it requires to go through it. And I'm okay to go through this slog for a while. Second is acknowledge the fog. What do I mean by fog is you don't know what you don't know. You don't even know why you're feeling this, why it's real, what are the skill, like what are the actual skill gaps, what are the perceived things. So it's going to be blurry and overwhelming for a while. And that's completely okay. Is that you have to acknowledge that and sort of, go on with your life. So that is going to be different, and it's okay to be confused for a while. But you should acknowledge that and move on. You should not just stay paralyzed. Finally, you should acknowledge the opportunity to grow. Every time you feel stretched, you're feeling stretched or confused, that this whole opportunity, that this struggle you're going through, of a year or so or down the line, you are going to feel that it was a period of growth. I personally went through this where when I worked at InstaMojo, I quickly in terms of product, people who were leading product, there was a CEO, there was a senior PM, and me. The senior PM left after a while, so I was the only guy leading product, like de facto. No one came and told me, give me this badge that you're head of product, but I got the opportunity and I went for it. And when I tell the story today, it's one of the best, growth periods of my life. In 2.5 years, I got that classic startup experience of 5 years of experience compressed into 2. Learned a lot. But I also happen to journal a lot. And when I go and read my journal entries, they're full of emo, cranky stuff. Like, oh, I was quite sad. Oh, today's a struggle. This also, that happened. So while you're going through it, it's going to be a struggle. When you actually come out of it, it's going to be a growth story. So you have to acknowledge that this is an opportunity to grow. So embrace sort of your growth mindset and the opportunity in front of you. So in that form, you now, these 3 things together, you're sort of ready to prepare, to go and now slay the dragon, so to speak. So now it's time to begin. You've acknowledged, you've committed to the slog, you've committed, you don't know, and you're not going to remain paralyzed. So what next? First thing you'd want to do is, there's a whole challenging world in front of you. You don't know. So what you want to do is scope the problem down. Now, you know that you have some strengths. You might know that, okay, I'm good at analytical stuff. I'm good at marketing things. I'm good at etc. So where are those places where you can get those quick wins, where you can plug in and start at least doing something, and where easy ones are going to come from. So scope it down. Focus on it might be in something simple as responding to emails timely. It might be simple as showing up to meetings prepared and speaking up in meetings. It might be understanding that you have to speak up to execs or manage upwards. Pick 2, 3 or few of your core focus areas and scope your problem down. Forget about the rest, because you don't even know what the whole situation is. And the next important thing is start. Not just start, but continue. Like, you are going to constantly. There's only one rule during this period where you're going to feel overwhelmed. This is fine, but you should not allow yourself to become inactive. You're going to fall, you got to bounce back and just keep chipping away at your goals. Keep your goals narrow and just keep going about it. So, you're like a hedgehog, extremely focused on surviving. Now, so once you've begun, how do you sort of converge? How do you sort of get into a phase where you're not feeling like an imposter anymore? So that's where you converge perception, vision, and reality comes in. What do I mean by this? There's perception where it's a picture of who you think you are. And in case here you're feeling like an imposter, you feel like, okay, I am out of place, and I'm not the right person to the situation. There's a vision. Your vision is where you want to be. Typically, when people say vision, they mean like a company vision 5 years down the line. Here, I mean your vision is you feeling your vision, feeling of being comfortable in this workplace. You being, your typical day. What does a good day look like? How quickly do you respond to email? How do meeting go? So you have your vision of how you are as a PM, how you are as a person. There's a perception of how you feel currently, and there's reality. And the only guardians of reality are actually other people. Reality is what other people think of you, and what other people can see. What you think of yourself is your perception. So you want to converge these 3 things. You want to converge your perception towards your reality, and your reality towards your vision. Sort of, I hope that's not too much of a stretch, but yeah. So these 2 things. How do you converge your sort of perception and reality? You need to seek help and feedback. So seek help. So at this point, you want to get feedback from others. Typically, company processes are set up for long feedback cycles. So if you don't have one-on-ones, set them up. If you have a peer from whom you can ask guidance or support, go for it. If you feel that you're feeling uneasy about something, set up time with them to go and ask questions and get, hey, is this spec document I wrote okay? Is this design I made okay? Is this marketing plan okay? Did I respond in time to that email? Or it's like, and they'll give you feedback. They'll tell you, hey, no, that was perfectly fine. That time you actually were pretty sloppy in how you performed. And take that feedback. That giving you negative feedback comes, definitely people receive a lot of negative feedback. It comes late. So you want to make sure that you're sort of feedback loop is kicked off, and you're getting the feedback early and in small chunks, which you can act upon, like, before you sort of get to a big failure. Next is invest extra in learning. So as part of, I think, any job in technology, you have to learn a lot, like, but at this point you have to acknowledge that you're in some sort of a sort of new zone where you don't know what you're tackling, and you want to invest a bit extra. So for me, this translated to me for the first time in my life. I bought a textbook on networking. I think I studied harder than I actually did during my college days. Like, I've never took a textbook that seriously. I was like, okay, I really have to get to this job. And I learned about TCP, IP, BGP, IP4, IPv4, IPv6, and all sorts of cool networking terms. And I invested in my learning. I also invested about how to manage stakeholders in a big company. So that was me. You'll have to figure out what your own goals are. Then use reflexivity. What do I mean? So reflexivity is one of my favorite words. So in physics and like the real world, like, it's one-way causality. This happens, that's why this happens. I think in psychology and human life, it's two-way. People who believe that they can succeed are the ones who will succeed. People who believe that they can, so motivated people show up early, send their reports in time. If you send in reports in time, you can become motivated or you can become successful. So it's two-way. So try to use that loop. Find your goals and make sure that you're continuing to make those small wins and going nonstop. Remember that your small actions are going to translate into you becoming a better person. Finally, the last three tips, I think these are fairly cliched, and like, but these are just applied to the situation. Check progress against your goals. Now, what's going to happen, and abandon what's not working. So iterating, what happens when you're in a new phase is that you're going to go through a lot of changes in a short period. In month one, you might be like, okay, I had a technical gap. In month two, it might be, okay, I'm not managing stakeholders well. In month three, it might be that, okay, I'm not doing project management well. So you're going to go through a lot of insights and breakthroughs in your own time during here. So you have to keep changing your goals, changing the goalpost too during this part. So you have to quickly abandon what's not working or what's irrelevant as you grow. Finally, what happens is one thing you have to do during this period is that, because feedback is typically slow, you have to develop this internal locus of control. Internal or say proximate. You can either realize, okay, you know what, I worked really hard on this spec and I think it's good enough, or you can vet it with your peers. But that should lead you to cherish the small wins. You want to cherish those wins because that's how you know you've acknowledged that you've made progress, and you want to go from sort of one win to another. So that's how you set yourself to sort of converge your perception, your vision, and your reality. So how do things pan out? Once you sort of go through this grind, you've committed, you've set your goals, you've hit small goals. So this is what your picture is going to be in the end. So like, when you start off your journey, you're going to be this scared, surprised Pikachu, not knowing what to do. When a year or so later, you're like, okay, Pika, bring it on. Like, you're still this tiny, fragile creature, but your mindset is completely different. Like that, and that's the main thing. That this whole imposter syndrome of feeling of being an imposter was something that was in your head, and it's something now. It's an attitude change that you want to bring about. So a year now down the line, a year ago, I used to feel scared about emails in my inbox because they would contain so much jargon that I had to Google for like 45 minutes for every email. That doesn't happen anymore. I have that shit under control, and many other things like that. So that's what your mindset changes, and you have your stuff under control. You don't stop feeling like an imposter anymore. So how does that look like? So there's no grand moment when someone comes and tells you, congrats, you're not an imposter anymore. It's just that feeling of being strange, that feeling of being an outsider sort of dies away. That your energy and your mind is now focused on pursuits that are relevant to the cause. That, now I'm just focused on landing my projects well, doing my user research, talking to my engineers, making sure things happen. But that feeling of being an imposter is just behind me. So I'm back to just being a PM now. I don't feel like an imposter PM. Two other things that I'd like to highlight, or long-term sort of, I think why people feel this sort of sense of imposter syndrome is about, like, we put work on a pedestal. So when there's some sort of doubt about your abilities at work, you feel this identity crisis that, oh my God, I suck and I don't belong here. So if you have a broader identity outside of work, you can manage crisis at work much better. That's like a very long-term tip. Like, you change your identity and you're not perturbed by it. Because, like, you have a lot of things going for you that, okay, someone asks you, like, okay, it's like a sport. I'll go and take care of it someday. You're not worried about it. It's not your all-encompassing identity. Finally, your only true sign of success is giving talks on imposter syndrome. So thank you for making me successful and by coming to this talk. So yeah, I hope I was able to impress upon you the feeling and some tips about how you can tackle this. Yeah, I'd like to take questions. Yeah.
That was very relevant, Darren, and very crisp. Thanks for that. So, folks, let's keep this session very open from here. If you have any questions, you can just write down in the chat, and you can directly ask Darren as well. So, Shruti, you want to start with your question?
Yeah, hi Darren.
Hey,
I
Shruti.
was really there was a lot of things that I could connect to because I've changed a lot of jobs myself, and it so happens that I have faced probably this a lot of times. Just didn't know how to articulate it in that manner. But I was just curious: was there any time that you sort of failed at something when you started off at the new place, or when you were successfully out of the imposter time, which is probably the breaking in time, and then you fail at something? How does one pivot out of it? Because there's a lot of baggage that comes along with, am I doing it right? Am I will I be perceived differently after this at a new job or otherwise?
Yeah, I think for me, a recent example of that is, so most recently, I've ended up sort of, even in my current role, I ended up in a remote team. This is like a year ago, my entire team who I dealt with, the engineering team, was in the US. And product managing a new area, product come project managing, was difficult, especially in something I didn't know. But, and plus this team was not talking to them over a 12-hour delay over email, and it became difficult. So I tried my own efforts. How do I do it over email? I generally realized that there was a trust gap. So it involved me just first, I actually sitting up time with all of those engineers myself and just getting a rapport with those guys. And then I would say I went and actually flew down to that place, spent more like 2 weeks there, did meetings, spoke to folks, and sort of grew out of that. Okay, crossed the trust line. It did require me to do something out of the blue. I had this whole middle class mentality, like, how can I spend this company budget or whatever? My boss is like,
Yeah.
just go. Like, just go and talk to these people, and like, you just don't waste time. And I was like, I was actually late. I went in my 4th or 5th month, and I should have gone in my 3rd, or like, I should have gone in my 1st week, I'd rather say. Like, that's
Put a face
why.
to that name they see popping up.
Yeah. So, and that definitely helped. So that's something, so that required some sort of courage to leap out of it. And yeah, I mean, pivot is like, I discovered something new that it could help, and I went for it and pushed for it and got that result. But it's definitely, I think it's about finding that new extra step or that leap that can solve it, or trying 2-3 of these leaps till something works. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Abhinav?
Yeah. Hey, Darren, Abhinav here. So if you're joining a new company as a new PM, how do you deal with high stake individuals who are your stakeholders? I think Narayana has also asked the same question.
Did you say high stakeholders? I really hope your stakeholders are not high. Okay.
High stake stakeholders, like you have to deal with.
I'm kidding. I know. Yeah. No. So yeah, this is something that I'm dealing with right now. So it's a two-way sword. Like, you want to get that visibility, but also stakeholders also have very little attention that you have to give. So for me, as I've understood the problem, is there are these proper slots. There are some predefined slots where you can sort of interact with your big stakeholders. One is, there are common mailing lists, that we presentations to execs, there are exec reviews and things like that, where it's a setup forum to sort of formally engage with stakeholders. You can go and put a foot there. Just be bold enough to say, okay, this time I want to present. My team has an initiative. You should go first and all. And even if your team has a slot, make sure you get a chance to that. So that's sort of tackling it from the visibility front. In terms of dealing with stakeholders, I think another thing to just think of, whenever you get an opportunity, is assume that, I mean, when you talk about stakeholders, it's folks, execs who have very little attention. So you need to make things very crisp, very clear. Why are you doing this? What are the approaches have you tried? Why will this succeed? Who else is doing it? Or things like that. Why are you good to do this? And how much budget do you need? So these questions should be very well vetted and answered. So that's something you want to bounce with your team, see other examples before you go and pitch it to your exec. Also, I think managing stakeholders is also about developing relationships. So they too are people. So when you have visibility, it should not be just about showing up in certain meetings. If you get a chance, just be bold and set up a one-on-one whenever there's an option. Some execs do it proactively, but you might get a chance, be it a hallway conversation. Go and set that time aside. That might lead you to sort of, at least develop a relationship. So it's not about managing per se, but it's about getting your work across, developing a relationship, and making sure that you're set up for success. Yeah.
Darren, can I add to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, Abhinav, one of the things which I generally tell my team as well, and I've seen in past as well, is that, see, irrespective of however high stake the stakeholders are. With people, anybody who's managing a width of things will always not know all the things that are there about the thing that you are working on. So if you're whatever you are working on, and that's one part of the things that the stakeholders are responsible for, you have to have extreme understanding of your task. So if you go to a high stake stakeholder or a leader or a CPO or a CTO or a CEO, and they tell you more about your area of work, that generally doesn't work. They're looking for expertise in your area. So go to them with extreme preparedness. You should have depth, but you should be, as Dalan said, be respectful of their time. Give them what they want to listen. Don't beat around the bush. Don't tell them stories that are irrelevant, and give them what will add more value to the product or the business, and they'll be mostly be happy. That's one thing. And the second thing is that each person has a style of working. Some people like to hear data. Some people like to hear research. Some people like to hear status. So try to understand those people and use those things to get their interest, and then get into more conversations and cracking more things.
Awesome. Amazing, guys. Thank you so much, Diwakar and Dalan.
Yeah. Narayan Rao, I think you have the same question, or you have a different question?
Yeah, same question. I think you guys answered it very well. Thanks.
Yeah. Aditya Manjunath.
No, it's been answered very well. Thank you, Dalan. And thank you, Diwakar.
Oh, your question is answered?
No, but I had a different question because I'm from a purely research background.
Yeah, please do.
So I come from a purely computer science research background, dealing with machine learning and those types of fields. Any idea if you've dealt with people who have transitioned from a purely research background to a corporate environment, such as in a PM role, and how they dealt with the syndrome?
You want to take a shot, Diwakar?
No, it's for you. I just had the answer for that question, so
okay.
I answered.
Yeah. If I talk about research background, I think there's two leaps to that, right? So one is, I think the leap from say research background to say engineer working in a setup is not that too hard to imagine, and I think that's fairly common. You see folks, machine learning PhDs, etc., transition into data scientists or ML engineers. It's a fairly known track. The other is a leap from say being an engineer to be a PM. That's the other sort of hop. And the engineer to PM hop is, I think it's not that difficult. It's actually, in fact, the most common one, where engineers first feel like, okay, that's, hey, this who made us, who wrote these specs? Why was this product built? This is dumb. And they sort of try to understand what's happening in the org, and they look at that and try to transition. I don't know particularly on the research bit, but I think if you break it down into these things, I think one leap is easier for you. But the other leap about thinking about business ownership and something might be something that is the bigger gap you'll have to cover. What is your mindset as an owner of an entire product when things are not in your control, where you're not writing code, but you just have to influence people. That's the bigger leap. And I have seen folks who have transitioned, both through formal routes, doing MBA, etc., and sometimes even directly, but sort of the organic transition, like from research to engineering to the engineering manager or like a PM.
Yeah, that was pure. That was very crisp. Thanks, Dalan.
Dalan, I have one question as well.
Sure.
How much of imposter syndrome and the worry of one not being able to not being good enough influenced by the current peer group that you work with? Does it play a big role, or is it does it play a small role?
Okay. Yeah, I think the peer group thing, right? Especially if it's outside your company, I think that's more like FOMO. I think it's less of imposter syndrome. It's like, and I think all these things have happened to me for sure at some point or the other. Or I have suffered everything. I'm just kidding. FOMO is like, okay, you feel like, hey, this guy, that other guy, he's 2 years my junior, but he's already a PM. He's gone to this thing. He's working at Booking.com. This guy's at Facebook, whatever. And you're like, shit, man, I'm behind. like, I'm falling behind. Like, I think that's happened to me. And that ship has sort of sailed for me. I just given up. Like, this is what I can't control their fate. And, they're succeeding, good for them. They're not succeeding, maybe I can help them out, but I can only influence my destiny or, what's in front of me. And if there's positive feedback there, that if you see that, okay, this guy really takes a lot of time in doing X, he's really clear about how he communicates about Y, or when I talk to him, he's very precise in terms of he has a very good depth. He or she have solid depth about how they talk about the users. So those are actual takeaways I can take back. Okay, yeah, you know what? I've been doing this in a lazy way, and I should really step up my game. That's how I would think of it. But you can't live with FOMO forever. It's definitely that hurts a lot of people. I know for sure. And I think you should just narrowly focus on the things you can control, and whether you can take anything out of that feeling of FOMO, jealousy that you have, or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Chandranus has a question.
Hey Dylan, first of all, thank you so much for accepting to speak in Creators of Products, Creators Arena series. So I have two questions here. So on one, so as per your experience, or your own and the one which you have observed around people, so how much time generally takes for people to come up to speed on challenging circumstances or the new circumstances? How much time one should give themselves to be able to start?
Easy answer. It depends. Okay, but I'll tell you things I've heard or experienced. So there was actually one. Before I sort of joined Microsoft, I had spoken to a couple of my college alumni here, and he honestly said people sometimes take 2 years to get used to the system here. There's a lot of things you're not used to. It's a fairly old company with processes set, and it has a history which most other companies or tech startups, etc., even the big ones, don't have. They're hardly 10 to 15 years old. Microsoft is 40 years old. So that was the warning I was given. It can take you up to 2 years just to get used to the system. So imagine that as the upper bound. I think at the lower bound, I think in generally understanding a new area, completely new area. For me, it was networking. For someone else, it might be going from a data scientist to in the world of web development or whatever. It can take, I think, fairly 6 months. I think 6 months is possibly a lower bound we can set. So that's roughly in the range in which it should land. Yeah.
Correct. So because I heard you speaking about taking some time, and when we enter to the new role, we think that we will be starting to deliver from the day one itself, which is not the case, right?
So unless it's exactly the same role and everything is the same, and you've been teleported to a similar setup, I think that's not true. So.
Correct. So second, Dylan, one thing. So how do we measure ourselves, right? So the way we perceive our work will be different from how it is getting perceived by someone else, correct, within the organization. So any factors there or any matrices there which we will say, yeah, so we are fine. So I am fine. I'm doing fine now. I'm getting up to the speed, and it's not required to get more panic. So kind of factors which we should look at. Positive signs, I'll say.
Okay, one is I think you can look at external and internal. So if there's external things, like someone gives you feedback that, hey, you're showing up very unprepared to your design reviews, or specs are very sloppy, or etc. That's things you want to first just clear out of the way. Like with your EZOs, there's some trouble somewhere, and that's like an external feedback which you want to correct. But the more important one is the internal metrics. Internal metrics of, hey, I will try to put out good quality specs. So you can't actually, or I will try to respond to all my emails within 10 minutes or within 2 days, say some sort of thing, or I will try to do X, I will show up to all meetings prepared, or I'll make notes before I go to all things, whatever. So you want to set these internal metrics which you can measure. And they'll change by your situation. So I can't give you exact set which should be defined based on what you feel are your goals. So if you feel that, okay, my goal is to be able to have grow into a senior PM, what does it take? It takes leadership. So and selling my product. So let me try to land products or projects that involve engaging with lots of stakeholders, selling products across the org or whatever, pitching products, etc. So you will have to define your own goals there. So I don't think I can give an answer very cleanly.
Okay, perfect.
Diwakar can add, I think. Yeah.
No, I think you answered well on this.
I feel like I'm in an exam and all my answers are going good. When is the Googly coming?
So today is the Googly coming from Srishti. Srishti?
Hey, hi, this is Shristi. So my question is actually something that I went through. Like, when I started as a PM, I really joined an early stage startup, and that was my first PM stint. And day one itself for me, it was like, okay, what to do? I understand there are rules, or rather there is something that is called as 90-day. You have to prepare this. Day one you have to look at this. But what do you think? What is that first thing that should come or that should be taken up? Like first 4 points. Like, hey, start it this way. Because I always felt that 90-day plan something gets boggled down as soon as you enter there. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to understand from you, did you went through this or is it like something that can be dealt with?
So I think the main thing you want to do is, I think the broadest term to define what it should do first is like acquire context. Like when I say context, it's like what is your team? Who are the people here? What are they like? What's troubling them? What's frustrating them about their practices? This is like people stuff. Then there is like business stuff. What is the product? How much revenue is it bringing in? How many users does it have? And get context about that. What are the users, etc. Business context. You might require to get org context, like how is this team performing in general? What are the possibly internal politics involved? Things like that. Or then process context, like okay, how do these guys, are these guys a super agile user story kind of folks? Are they more loose? What's kind of the culture here in terms of development? What are processes here? So you'd want to get context with that. So it's not, and one thing is, you can't first sit and like, hey, can someone tell me the context here? You want to acquire it. Go and have lots of conversations for sure. I think there is this very famous thing. It's called the Boz algorithm. Like if you want to know who the important people are, talk to a person, ask them who the 3 important people are, then go to those 3 people, ask them who the important person is. So you'll eventually know who the 3 important people are within your team or your company. So you sort of, at least now you know who are people you should be communicating with are. The next thing, I think one other tip is try to do something small, like, launch a small feature or launch or ship a small improvement, because in the process of doing that, you'll acquire a lot of context. In that process of launching that feature, you'll have to ask, okay, what's our QA process? What's our release process? What is our this? That will automatically give you context. So that's the active way to doing it. Other way is the conversational way of doing it. But you want to, before you start and formulate what you want to do, you want to get a lot of context. So.
Got you. I think I quite like the last point that you said, wherein once you ship something, you actually start talking and collaborating with people, and that's where they kind of, you get to know them, and probably they get to know you as well.
Yeah, and you get to know the process and all also.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'll just add to this, Srishti, that if you go to a large company, there's a good chance that you'll get a lot of hand holding. And if you go to a startup, you might not get all that hand holding. So, but what stays common in both these cases is curiosity. So you have to be extremely curious in the first few days, few weeks, and just try to find out about everything, what's going on. As you said, what is the process? What's the user? How do the products flow? What happens? Just get as much, like, do an information overload. And one way to do that is to ask for all the public data dashboards that they have. If you go, just ask for all the dashboards. What are the numbers everybody looks at? Is it users? Is it transactions? Is it revenue? Is it conversion? So if you get access, like on day one, day two, all the public dashboards that all the other PMs and other teams are looking at, then by end of the week, just by looking at those numbers, because you'll have time early on, you will create mental insights about what's going on in the company. And that will further continue to lead to, with your curiosity, to more and more information. And you'll not be dependent on other people to tell you what needs to be done.
Got you. Yeah. Yeah, Divakar, I think that was very clear to me, and it really helped me here. Thanks.
Surya? Surya, you have a question? So Surya wants to know, you can choose to answer at the end. How do you approach your writing? Truly appreciate your articles.
Okay. Okay, I've been struggling with my writing for many, many years lazily. Like when the pandemic, I started to write a little more. My current process is just to try to write 1 hour a day. Just like, keep the input going. And whenever I feel comfortable, I just try to have a rough, I'm more serious about the input goal of writing 1 hour a day, or less serious about the output goal of publishing. But eventually I'm rough target of article being published a week. That's like the process. The other thing is, I think writing is a follow-on of reading and thinking. So go and read white. I love reading. I had to cut. Every time I set a writing goal, I ended up reading more and not writing. So I had to just be serious with myself that, okay, please take time out and read. So I think writing is when you have thoughts, you condense someone else's thoughts, you have new ideas, etc. It will come naturally when you sort of are filled with ideas from others. Be it reading articles on Medium or long books or whatever. Like reading is, I think, one good segue to launch into writer writing. Yeah.
I think Surya is back as well. So Surya, we answered your question just now. I hope you got the answer.
Yes, I just joined just back in time.
Okay.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for the answer.
So I think we are done with the questions here. Thank you so much, Dylan, for your answer. This was really good. And can we all have a quick round of applause for Dylan? All we have to do is unmute and just clap.
Or raise your hands on Zoom, I guess.
Thank you so much, Dylan. And I think this is going to be very useful. We are going to upload this on YouTube as well. Feel free to share it with other people who would be able to make use of this.
Surely. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity, Vakar. Yeah. And the Creators Product folks. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great evening and a nice week.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dylan.
Bye.